Hi, I'm Lin Classon. I'm very excited to be here, to be part of the Chicago Women in Tech community. A bit about myself. I am the head of product for the Cloud Center of Excellence at Ensono. I started my career as a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. Prior to this role, I worked at Google on travel search for 7 years. I'm pretty sure many of you are very familiar with flight search and hotel search. And hopefully we all get to travel again very soon, especially traveling to conferences. Speaking of conferences and traveling, I really wish I were there in person to meet you and connect with you, because when there are so few of us in the tech industry, the opportunity to connect and get to know each other and learn from each other is precious. This moment, when we are all trapped at home, when we are all trying to make work from home work in the middle of the chaos, the obligations, and the uncertainties, especially if you're a parent with young children and all that entails. This moment, I believe, is actually a great opportunity for us to take a step back and take stock, to rethink and reevaluate what tech conferences mean from the women's perspective, and how we could all do better to improve our experiences. So when we are going back to conferences in person, we are all ready to tackle it. This is why I'm here today. I want to share with you the findings from Ensono's second annual Speak Up survey on women and tech conferences. I want to share with you the findings on women's experiences and representation of women in tech conferences, and of course, what it means for the tech industry in general. More importantly, I want to share ways that we could all work together to improve tech conferences for all women. So next time, again, when we go back to these unplanned in-person conferences, the conferences are an avenue of empowerment for women. Before I started with the numbers, I thought I'd share with you how this all got started. In November 2017, I tweeted this picture of an empty ladies' room. I was at a large tech conference and I found myself alone in this ladies' room that was empty and sparkling clean. Score, I thought to myself. This conference was attended by more than 40,000 people that year, and I was there in this room by myself. Imagine that. Very different experience from all the men that were complaining about having to miss a session because they had to wait for a long time for men's room for once. The point I was trying to make, of course, was that even though I appreciate the empty ladies' room that was clean and comfortable, I would trade it for anything. I would trade it for the opportunity to be surrounded by more women right there with me. It was a point that resonated with many. Around the same time, we also started to see more and more reports that highlighted issues surrounding tech conferences that were undermining the industry's effort in bringing about gender equity. From the absence of women speakers, questionable choices made in presentation and marketing material, to news about robot strippers, we decided it was time to take control of the headlines and be a change agent. So the team at Ensono went to work. We started conducting a study in 2018. We conducted a survey again in 2019 and published it this year in the middle of the pandemic, right when all conferences went online. We wanted to continue this important conversation, and we also wanted to enrich the conversation through the perspectives of women of color. How did our experiences differ? We also look at conferences from the physical design elements. While we are all online, it is now a great time to evaluate and rethink the designs that do not have women in mind. Think of all the times when you witnessed a female panelist struggling with a bar stool, or a female speaker having to hold the tiny mic in her hand because she is not wearing a suit. To understand how these experiences impact women, we surveyed 500 women in the US and UK who had attended a tech conference within the last year. We asked them questions including, did the conferences provide necessary accommodations such as nursing rooms? And have you experienced or witnessed harassment or discrimination? There has also been an ongoing movement demanding more women speakers in conference speaker lineups. We wanted to help with a data-driven perspective. So to quantify it, we audited 18 major tech conferences around the world for the past 3 years, such as CES and the Next Web. We look at not only how many women, but also how many women of color were keynote and standalone speakers at these conferences. Not surprisingly, our study resonated with many, including reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, and Quartz. We also learned that I was not the only person who has been surprised and has taken and shared pictures of empty women's bathrooms. It almost warrants its own hashtag, something like #EmptyLadiesRoom. Because real sustained change involves a larger shift in society and culture, we know we have to keep speaking up about speaking up. Conferences are important for networking and for visibility, especially for women in tech. There is strength in numbers. When there are so few of us, conferences are where we get to meet each other, make connections, and build our strength from each other. Even more importantly, being a speaker at a conference provides women an opportunity to build up confidence, visibility, and credibility, something that does not come by easily, especially if you're often the only one in the room. So what does the latest report tell us about the experiences and representation of women at tech conferences? What actions could we take to change the narrative? What we found is that women are underrepresented in keynote lineups, and especially women of color. Women represent 32% of keynote speakers. The number is 14% for women of color. Of course, we're happy to report a positive upward trend compared to last year. At the same time, I also want to point out that the increase of women of color speakers from 5% to 14% was largely driven by one single conference. This conference showcased 42 women of color speakers in 2019. If we removed this outlier, that number dropped from 14% to 9%. We could do better. We have to do better. Because representation matters. 32% of Black and Latina women say a lack of diversity would keep them away from a conference. The lack of representation of women in tech conferences can be seen as a reflection on the tech industry itself. According to a McKinsey & Company report, the percentage of computing roles women hold has largely declined in the US over the past 25 years. The decline is even more steep for underrepresented women of color. Data gathered by the Society of Women Engineers showed that more than 30% of women switched away from a STEM degree while in college. Only 30% of women who earned a bachelor's degree in engineering are still working in engineering 20 years later. 30% of women who have left the engineering profession mention organizational climate as the reason. This gap even shows up when deciding who gets funded. According to McKinsey again, all male startup teams received 85% of total venture capital investment in the US in 2018, while all women teams received just 2%. We are in danger of a vicious cycle if we do not make concerted efforts on all fronts to ensure girls and women are inspired and encouraged to study, join, and stay in science and technology. Our survey also shows that 61% of women do not believe conferences are designed with women in mind. The usual suspects, as expected, are furniture, AV equipment, swag, and facilities. Thinking about the relationship between the lack of female presence and conference designs, I cannot help but wonder which is the chicken and which is the egg. The design elements at these conferences presume that the attendees and speakers are male by default. Bar stools for speakers that don't really work for someone wearing a dress. AV equipment that either requires a pocket or suit lapels. One survey respondent reported there were no women's bathrooms at a conference she attended. How did that even happen? When you're confronted with these things over and over again, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's telling you that you are not expected to be here. Despite all your study, all your hard work, and all the credentials you have earned, you are not expected here. Pile on top of that, the actual incidents of harassment and discrimination. 29% of the respondents experienced sexual harassment. 48% experienced discrimination across racial, gender, and sexual orientation-based discriminations. Similar to women's experiences in the office, the more visible you are, the higher is your chance to encounter discrimination and harassment. The number increases for female keynote speakers. 39% reported experienced sexual harassment, while 62% of the female keynote speakers said they have encountered discrimination. We also learned that while roughly 1/3 of women experienced sexual harassment and 1/3 of women witnessed sexual harassment, 1/3 of these went unreported. The main reason? A lack of a formal or clear process for reporting misconduct. Something needs to be done. And by publishing and sharing these numbers, I believe we could make it happen. Our report is not meant to tell the story of doom and gloom. We want to encourage all conference organizers, companies, and individuals in the tech industry to take actions and make change happen. Some improvements can be easily made and have been made. For example, between the 2 years we conducted the study, we saw great efforts being made to include and publicize a code of conduct. 80% of women were aware of a code of conduct at the conference they had attended, compared to just 51% in our last report. Now, in the case of no clear process for filing reports on harassment and discrimination, conferences could consider including a reminder of the code of conduct and the reporting process on the first page of the conference agenda or on the back of the badge. Or even better, especially now that conferences have gone online, by clicking a button on the conference homepage or in the mobile app. Before sending their employees to conferences, companies should also vet conferences and proactively inquire about a code of conduct. They should also collect feedback from their employees afterwards regarding facilities, amenities, and their overall experience. And share these customer feedback with conference organizers and hold them accountable for addressing identified issues, especially reported incidents of misconduct. The conferences covered in our audit welcome more than 1 million people annually, many of them from large tech companies who also run large conferences themselves. These companies have enormous leverage in the market, and they should use that leverage to change the discourse. For starters, companies should refuse to sponsor or send their employees to conferences that do not demonstrate proactive efforts in encouraging diversity in participation and representation. These large companies should lead the way and say no to all male panels, say no to all male speaker lineups. Part of the industry's problem has been that event organizers look at providing facilities such as a mother's room as special accommodations, when these should have been looked at as table stakes to level the playing field for more women to participate. Companies can and should vote with their feet by requiring thoughtful design elements that take all genders into consideration and speaker lineups that show the kind of diversity the tech industry is striving for. Similarly to how large companies were pressured into sharing diversity data several years ago, I wonder when we will be able to see tech conferences sharing diversity data on attendees, panelists, and speakers, and also data on reported incidences of misconduct and what the measures they have taken to address them. The tech industry's lack of diversity is an issue that affects all of us. 8 out of 10 tech companies now offer gender sensitivity training. Employers need to advocate the importance of allyship to all their employees and equip them with actionable tactics to support each other. And this is very important, to be able to call out unconscious bias. This is muscle memory that needs to be trained, practiced, and built up. By consciously amplifying the voice and presence of those who have historically been underrepresented, we all can help move the needle. Women want to see people that look like them on the keynote lineup, on a panel, on camera. And when we go back to in-person conferences, in the exhibit halls, and yes, even in the line for restrooms. It's up to every one of us to be the catalyst for change by voicing our opinions within our companies, demanding conferences are safe for women and designed with all genders in mind, and taking steps to make sure our female colleagues get the support and coaching they need, the skill sets and opportunities to be a speaker or participate on a panel. Finally, I want to share this quote from Senator Kamala Harris. This advice from a powerful leader who happens to be Black, Asian, Indian, and female is something that we all need to take to heart. There will be many times in your life when you will be the only one that looks like you, that has had your experience in the room. Don't you ever let anybody make you feel alone. Because you must remember, when you walk in that room, we are all in that room with you, and you are carrying our voice with you. So, shoulders back, chin up, because your voice matters and you will never be alone. As more women in tech are seen on the center stage, both literally and figuratively, more women will be seen as leaders in their chosen fields. And that means more girls and young women will be inspired by these role models, because you can't be what you can't see. Representation matters. Let's continue to make noise, make demands. Let's continue to speak up. I would love for this to become an ongoing dialogue, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Please share them with me and the audience during Q&A. Afterwards, you could always find me and connect with me on LinkedIn and of course on Twitter. I'll see you at the Q&A.